We heard you remind yourself.
Well, I'm very good at reminding myself, but not actually doing. But I just hit the record button, so for those of you that are tuning in, I guess after the fact, sorry you couldn't be here. We miss you, but glad you're able to tune in. So we've got a number of folks online. We're looking here at the materials microsite. Last time we kind of just went through these, and it was meant to be pretty basic, introductory. Along the way, our goal is just to ensure that you have opportunities to ask questions that you might have, and be sure that expectations are more or less set. We don't want you to come into the bootcamp surprised. It's probably some uncertainty, but hopefully it's an excitement that's behind that, and not sort of too much uncomfort there. The focus of this one is going to be around methods and tools, and really around that, particular to the tools. As I mentioned earlier, the fun thing with Ignite is that projects come in and they are all different types, shapes, and sizes. Some projects have been sort of puttering along for a couple of years. Some are brand new. Some are technology focused. Some are process oriented. Some involve perhaps data and visualizations, and some involve more just human and or services oriented efforts, and that's fine. But what we've learned over the last few rounds is that there's a pretty wide, I guess, degree of understanding across to what types of tools and technologies, and partly I'm thinking actually about tools that you find online that might be available out there on the internet. What's out there, what's useful, do we recommend anything? And then in particular, wide variety in understanding among the policies and interpretations of policies as to what tools can be used and in what way. So what I'm about to present is probably, in some circles, a little controversial. And in fact, I have regular interactions with folks that are experts in these various areas. And there are people, for example, that are in the technology space that agree wholeheartedly with our interpretation and understanding of things, and there are folks that disagree with this. Part of this, if you think about even your website filtering, right? So even with across the department, your ability to access certain web pages varies. If you're at CMS, if you're at SEA, turns out you probably have a lot more things blocked than if you're at the CBC or what's another that's really open? NIH. NIH is pretty open as well. You are operating and working in the IDEA Lab for the sake of your projects and the time over the next 3 months. You should feel free to say that you're working on a project supported by the HHS IDEA Lab. Sometimes that allows more doors to open. You've probably found that out just by the nature of perhaps getting interviews. But there are a number of you that might end up sort of having, there may be questions raised by either your supervisors or your security and or sort of IT policy groups that are local to your area. If anyone along the way has questions, we're very interested in just open, honest conversations. We by no means do we mean to minimize the real risks that are out there with using various unapproved technologies, if you will. But we have a pretty good understanding as to how these things work. And we've got experts within the IDEA Lab that have backgrounds in privacy, security, 508 and accessibility, and in terms of service issues that pop up as well. And so just so you guys know, as you work along the 3 months and you end up using something that you find online, maybe it's a cool prototyping tool, you should feel free, if questions come up, to just start a conversation with them. And it turns out that usually there's just a little misunderstanding and some gut reactions that are usually the right gut reactions, don't quite fit into the paradigm in which we are operating here. The main overarching theme here, and this is actually important beyond just providing the rationale for you using different online tools, is that you're not building anything official, right? So the whole principle of Ignite is that you are testing out the idea. You're trying to build sort of business validation for the concept. Nowhere in the next 3 months should you be launching any official government website, any official government service, nor should you be acting as if your Ignite effort is an official government project. Rather, you're just sort of testing out an idea, and you have a small team of people that are playing around with tools that would help you gather information to see whether maybe later on down the road an official government tool can be used. So, for example, if along the way you decide that you need to make like a video that communicates the benefit of your product to certain people, and you want to put that up on YouTube, I would probably not recommend that you go through like your official public affairs office, for example, to get on the official, FDA YouTube channel, right? So that try to avoid that. What you can do, you can actually create your own YouTube channel and throw something up. Now, you have to be sure that you do that in a way that doesn't yourself as official. It recognizes that this is like a short-term, temporary, very unofficial, it's not promoted type of thing. You just need a place to host a video so you can send it to your customers for feedback, right? So those are the types of things, and I know I'm sort of speaking in theoreticals here, but I'm trying to sort of provide the context for this conversation. What I'm hoping to do is, I've got actually a few different tools that we'll dive into in a bit. And I'm going to mention a couple of these particular policies so that you have an awareness of what they each mean and what they are, and then we'll make room for some conversation here as well. All right, that seems like a natural place for me just to pause very briefly, and I've also noticed that a few new people have jumped on the phone. For those of you that have done that, thank you so much for joining. You are, by default, you're muted, but I have unmuted the project leads and a number of the coaches as well. Yeah, let me just pause. Any sort of questions or initial comments from you guys on the phone?
I'm Dave Jaworski. I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
If our customer is really like a company, and it's a real pharmaceutical company, and we're going to try to validate a prototype, and it's not official, how do we do that? Any ideas?
Yeah. Well, so that is a spot-on question, and there's like 100 questions I would probably want to ask first to figure out like what you're trying to validate, what you're trying to test.
And some answers don't really know why he doesn't.
Yeah. I'd say let me just sort of speak broadly, David, and then maybe we could dive into you for a second. There are different types of tests, different levels of sophistication of sort of testing out tools. Sometimes you're testing just like the underlying need for things. So it's like, hey, we hear you, customer, have a problem. Is this the type of thing that you think would be a good solution? And you're just kind of looking for like yes or no's, or I'm oversimplifying there, but you're trying to just get some feedback as to whether you're running the right direction. On the other end, there's like types of tools or types of tests where maybe you're looking to figure out, okay, if this is the tool that they want, if you give it to them, is it really usable, right? So it's like maybe it theoretically meets the need, but once you hand it to them, they can't find that green button because it's just, it's an ugly interface or something like that. So, that's another type of test. There's another type of test that we call like, sometimes we call it a beta test or like a micro test. And that's where you would like actually give it to them and see if they really use it. So that's where you're like gauging their behavior instead of just whether they say they would use it, right? Well, now actually use it. But all these things are meant to be pretty unofficial. Now, for those of you that are in like regulatory agencies like the FDA and CMS, sometimes that can be touchy. The coaches are around in order to help sort of navigate those types of things and navigate both in terms of what's the right type of test, what's the right level of prototype to be, sharing with your customers, but also to help navigate in terms of sort of the government to industry relationship. And then we've got, so Laura Adam, for example, is one of our coaches, and she comes from the FDA, so she would be pretty good at navigating some of the FDA stuff. I used to work at CMS, so I know CMS world pretty well, so I could probably help navigate those things. We know some of that stuff can be touchy. So.
Okay, great. Yeah, Laura's our coach, so one of our coaches.
Okay.
That's great.
Yeah, was that helpful? I know I sort of wound about.
We were just thinking of actually during an inspection, how it would even test this, and it's going to be an interesting.
So I think this is I think a really practical way to think of the prototype in most cases that it's really just a communication tool or a way to illustrate what you're talking about. Okay. So that's sort of the most sort of qualitative way to use the prototype as a test. When it gets down to actually testing for what people actually will have the impact, what people actually put in their hands, use a new process or a new product or something like that, then that definitely requires a little bit more sensitivity. But early stage prototyping, we're talking about like sketches and stuff like that. Just think of prototypes as an illustration or a way to communicate.
Okay.
Great. Yeah, and this is all going to be a little fuzzy, but the point of the bootcamp will actually be to dive into this quite a bit further.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thanks for your question. So let me just quickly mention and ensure everybody is familiar with these 4 particular policies that are applicable to this conversation around tools. I'm going to work my way, if you're looking at the screen here, from right to left. PRA is the Paperwork Reduction Act. We've already had some communication about this. It always comes up, am I allowed to talk to more than 9 individuals from outside of government? Doesn't that trigger the PRA? And the answer is no, as long as you're having just normal, unstructured conversations. We talked quite a bit about that over the finalist stage. So that interpretation will continue. FISMA is the Federal Information Security Management Act. This pertains to information security. Broadly, some of you have data-oriented projects. For the use, for your Ignite purposes, figure out how you can have play with dummy data. To the extent possible, and I'm sure it's possible for each of you. We'll have to dive into each individual project, but you can create dummy data sets pretty easily, and that way you don't ever have to worry about accidentally sharing or putting information in an unsecured email chain or anywhere else across the internet. Dummy data is fantastic and beautiful. It allows you to test some of the underlying sort of business validations without worrying about and having to jump through the various security protocol hoops and privacy impact assessment hoops that might come into play. So if you're dealing with anything in your sort of real world with sensitive information, have this in the back of your head. Is there a way to use information that could be made public? Maybe it's a publicly available data set or a dummy data set that's comparable in structure that you can continue to play with. So that's just a high-level overview of how FISMA tends to apply and how to ensure that you work with an Ignite, recognizing information security requirements and how important that is. 508 is, this is Section 508 of the American Rehabilitation Act, I believe. This pertains to the accessibility of information particularly to those with disabilities. So for example, and if you've ever been involved with remediating and publishing a PDF in the government, or if you've been involved in publishing websites for the government, then you're very familiar with this. For example, if there are individuals out there who are trying to access government resources, perhaps though they are blind or have poor vision, they use the internet very, very differently, right? So they have these things called screen readers, and there's a way to structure and build websites to ensure that people with sight issues can still access the information. For the purpose of your Ignite effort, because nothing you're doing is an official government product or an official government resource, you shouldn't have to worry about 508 issues. Now, depending upon your product, of course, if you're working with those types of populations, then we'll have to think about that. But 508 generally should not be a roadblock for you actually working on your effort along the way. Prototypes do not have to be 508 compliant, right? Think of it that way. Terms of service. So TOS, this terms of service, you know what I can do. You know, when you go to any type of tool out there, whether it's Facebook, whether it is Twitter, whether it is Balsamiq is a tool that I use sometimes. And when you create an account, it asks you to check the box to agree to the HHS terms of service, or excuse me, the terms of service of the platform there. It turns out there are actually things in there that most government agencies cannot fully agree to. So there's this larger, very big process wherein the federal government, starting with GSA and then down to the department and agency level, actually negotiates new terms of service, new terms of services, I suppose, with these tools so that they are federal friendly. And in fact, service, yep. So there actually is a web page that is devoted to all of the tools for which HHS, and this applies to everybody within the department, all agencies. These are the ones for which HHS has actually agreed to and signed amendments to the standard terms of service. I am incredibly familiar with this process because I actually was the very first terms of service, I don't know if there wasn't even a title at the time, point of contact, I guess, within the public affairs office. And so I sort of set up this whole thing. And here's what you need to know here. This is another example of a type of policy that was set in place to ensure that official government products, official government services are done sort of properly and with all the right I's dotted and T's crossed. You're not creating official government products. You're not creating official government services. So generally, you shouldn't have to worry about TOS issues. Now, with that said, you should still be like really comfortable and familiar with the terms of service. You know, if you like Google around and you happen to find this neat prototyping tool and you want to play with it, pretty good chance you can. But do scan the terms of service and ensure that you know what you're doing. Check in with your coach and see and actually find somebody else that has had some familiarity with the tool before just diving into it. Just do your due diligence there, because there are sometimes there's something in there that like trying to think of a specific example. If you create, by creating a product, they like actually automatically make it public. There's not a way to hide it, which, for the most part is fine because we're all dealing with public stuff anyway. But you just like want to be sure you know what you're getting into. So that's a whole lot of information on terms of service, all to say now you kind of have a general sense of what it is, and broadly it shouldn't apply to you. There are other rules and other policies that may come into play.
Can you talk about a situation where that's actually come back to affect any project? Not having looked at TOS?
Well, so it tends to come up in before you actually start to use it. So imagine you're in conversations and somebody hears that you're using a particular tool. They're experts and people sort of in charge of each of these policies, and there are folks across the department who take particular stances that are like very black and white, and so they'll be like, oh, you can't use that tool because we don't have assigned TOS with it. Or you can't use that tool because it's not 508 compliant. And it turns out there's a pretty good chance that you can. Unfortunately, a lot of these conversations get presented as very black and white, very binary. Yes, you can. No, you can't. Only if it's on the list. Whereas a deeper understanding of these allows for some nuance and ensuring that you can use these tools if you understand what you're getting into and you ask the right questions along the way, and you take into account the spirit of each of these things, then we can help you figure out how to use these tools.
Okay, so it sounds like sometimes you're going to run into people who kind of act as gatekeepers for a specific solution, or at least people who want to just throw shade on your idea. So what it sounds like is it's a good idea to have sort of some important details in your back pocket ready to go, because you never know when these people sort of pop out of the woodwork to say, like, wag the finger a little bit. And so it's actually empowering to have a little bit in the back pocket about, okay, what the terms of service of each of these potential solutions are. To have at your disposal in case you just kind of need it on the spot.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And if you feel comfortable having that conversation directly with somebody who comes out and says, no, cool, it's also like our job here within the IDEA Lab to provide the air cover, if you will, that would come with this. And so we can have a conversation with them as well, just to ensure they understand. We have a shared understanding as to sort of how these things work.
And then the overall cover you have is the main point too. Is that I think the generic response, if you knew nothing else, would be to say, not in these words necessarily, but don't be threatened. This is just a test. Don't,
That's right.
We're not implementing anything. We're just seeing if there's any value here. We'll worry about a TOS later, or whatever the situation is. We can worry about it. If we even validate that this is the product we want.
Yeah. This might sound a little obscure, and you're trying to figure out how this is relevant to your project, but it more than likely will come up along the way for each of you. Any questions pertaining to these particular policies that were just mentioned? Okay, so some of your coaches have expertise and or experience in some various prototyping or project management tools online. Some don't have as much, but see them as your direct sort of contact, and then if you guys can't figure it out, then elevate it to me. This is Reed, and we'll figure it out from there. All right. So this was great. This was all just a disclaimer. We haven't even gotten to the tools yet. One more big disclaimer. It's very easy to get excited about tools and just to dive in and start using them, and then sort of figure out, oh, here's a neat tool. How does this work with my project? And we, of course, think that's not the right approach. Rather, keep the core principles in mind. Think about what you really need. Play around with a couple tools if you think they might end up being useful, but don't jump to a shiny object just because it happens to be shiny. And we always have a couple teams that dive too quickly into sort of like high-tech, either project management tools or prototyping tools, or they jump right into coding or something, when actually most teams, most projects benefit by starting really low-tech or even no-tech. Maybe actually just stickies on a wall is actually the best way to start. So these core principles are here to remind you about those things before just diving into the tools themselves. I've broken these out now by a few different areas, And I'm not going to go too deeply into each of them, but just sort of highlight a couple along the way. This is, the first question is probably, how did we come up with this list? So the internet, this is like going to be in my epitaph at some point. The internet is amazing, right? So there are so many great things out there, and you should feel free to Google or to Bing the internet or to Ask Jeeves, whatever your like search engine of choice is, and to find like a tool that you think would be useful for you. For example, if you just do a quick Google for top project management tools. I'm on Wi-Fi, it's a little slow. There's like, there's like a bagillion things out there. What we've done is look at the types of tools that have been most useful to teams over the last 4 rounds. We've also looked at tools that we've played with, and they fit a little bit more closely to our philosophy of doing things small, of running lean, of not over-engineering anything. And for the most part, these are also all free. But there are lots of other things out there, and you should feel free to explore the bounds of the internet. But these are things that we would sort of point out for you. You'll notice all along the way throughout this whole thing, we really try to highlight the value of using non-tech tools. It's we've even here in the IDEA Lab, we will occasionally get caught up with like, hey, let's try this new team collaboration tool we found online, but we like stumble through the technology itself when it turns out we could just create this little space on a wall with stickies, and it ends up working a lot better for us. So all along the way, we do a lot of things that are no tech or super low tech, and that should always be your first go-to. And in fact, when we're talking about prototyping in the boot camp, just about every single one of you is going to be starting with a no tech type of thing. Prototypes start very rough, very ugly, very simple, and then through iterations they may increase sophistication. But the very first prototype should be something that can be done in like a half hour, something super short. For those of you that are building technology things, and you have a bunch of technologists and or developers on your team, if you can hack together a website in a half hour and it's easy to like modify, then cool, like that can be a prototype. For those of you who don't have technologists, and perhaps you have contractors on board, or you just don't have developers sort of at hand, don't feel tempted per se to like jump into the technology space. The idea is like, what's the level of tool that you're comfortable with that can easily be tweaked and iterated along the way? And for the most part, that's going to be these like low, these like really low or no tech types of things. I'm going to show how actually we use a couple of these, and I'm going to try to tie them to particular sort of parts of your experience. As you guys know, there's a core piece of doing customer interviews here, and doing an interview over the phone is like okay, but you miss a lot of the non-visual cues. You miss sort of their body language. You're not even sure if they're listening. You might even, you don't get to see their like eyes cringe, if you use a certain word. So we encourage things to be in person, of course, if possible. But sometimes that's not possible, and so video actually ends up being a good second bet. Let's see, that didn't open. So we actually found that this is like a really excellent video chat tool, and you can create an account if you want, but you don't really need to. You can actually just do a little like this. It creates a URL for you that can be shared, and you can actually continue to use this. Oh, that's convenient. Hello, everybody. So you can share this, and on the other end, they don't have to like download a plugin. They don't have to install anything. So this tends to be like really great. It's very user friendly. The downside is it does not work in IE, which brings me to sort of a key point here. So this works well in Firefox. It's optimized for Chrome. Actually, within Chrome, it even allows you to do screen sharing. The default browser on everybody's computer is Internet Explorer. There is variability across the department as to the availability of other types of browsers, but you should each try, and most of you should be able to get a second browser on your computer. There actually have been various memos that have been released from the higher-ups in the security world that have recognized the security vulnerabilities of Internet Explorer, and thus have actually started to push out Chrome in different parts of the federal government. So try to just like download Chrome or download Firefox. It's funny, like if you were supported by ITIO and you try to download Firefox, I think it pops up that you can't, but like if you hit cancel, it actually lets you do it anyway. It's a very odd gate there that they put in. And if you, but if you continue to have barriers, then like call the help desk, tell them that you're in this HHS Ignite program, and that actually that requires that you have both Firefox and Chrome, and that hopefully will work. If it doesn't, let me know. We are also having communications through our information security office at the HHS level to communicate that down as well. We think that IE is insufficient to actually do real work, and Firefox and Chrome are so much better. So fight before you get to boot camp to figure out how to get Firefox into Chrome on your computers. So you can use things like Computer.net, which is actually a really, really great tool. So this is pretty straightforward. Computer.net, very straightforward. I'm pausing periodically so you guys can jump in with questions. Silence is either a great thing because I'm answering all your questions, or it's a terrible thing and you're all asleep. This is why phone lines are not always great. Any questions from you guys?
This is Rosalie. So if we're happy with the teleconferencing software that we already have, we don't really need to worry about appear.in?
Oh, yeah, that's right. So, yeah, Rosalie, thanks so much for that. So these are just sort of options for everybody to consider. If you have things within your office or things that you are more comfortable with, yes, certainly use those. These are just things. Not everybody has video conferencing available, and so we want to make folks aware of the others. Does that help?
Good for me.
Yes, it helps. This is Janice.
Okay. Great. So the next tool that I want to show you just very quickly is this thing called Trello. Trello. So if appear.in is great for sort of conversations, whether you're working with outside folks or even just amongst your team, you can have lots of people in there. Trello is useful for project management. I think I actually have my particular Trello board up. I should make one quick tangent here. If you are going onto any of these sites and you're creating accounts, ensure that you tie them to your work account, your work email. So usually there's like, what's your email and password? Use your work email there. It's very important that work stuff is firewalled and separated excuse me, from personal stuff. So always do work things. If you're ever using a Google product, don't use your personal Google account to get things done. There actually are ways to create like a work-related Google account. So like this, for example, this is tied to my work email address, as is other profiles that I create for other tools. All right, my goodness, like weird cough, but I'll try to work my way through this. Will, I might need you to periodically jump in though. So this is Trello. And initially, when you actually get in, these things are not here. I created these particular, I don't know what they call these, card sorts or stacks or something. The basic notion here is to try to get away from like long-term planning. It typically is created through like giant Gantt charts that will run a full year. Your experience within Ignite is going to be varying week by week. And while you might have some high-level goals that you're trying to accomplish, excuse me, what you're probably going to have a tougher time of is actually figuring out how to prioritize the things that are right in front of you.
Reed is struggling.
I'm like struggling over here, so I jump in.
You have allergies or something?
Yeah, I have some allergies. I'm just going to drink this water here.
If you could see Reed, he's definitely in pain. But he's okay. So Trello.
I just try to say like, this is Trello. This is how we use it.
Yeah. So I mean, if you look at the different cards that are stacked here, it's more or less stuff that, if you've heard of a Kanban board is sort of a digital version of that. Very simply put, it's a way to manage what you have to do coming up and prioritize, what should happen now versus what can sort of happen later. And honestly, that's one of, from your positions, one of the hardest things to figure out sometimes is to prioritize, what really matters at this point versus what's sort of a nice to have thing under our belt. And so this is just sort of a nice way to visualize it. And visualizing helps you sort of organize for yourself. It's a very lightweight tool. It's a good way to communicate with your team as well, and a really good way to communicate with your coach. So that's Trello. Is there another tool you wanted to move on to? See, next up to urgent, right? So we know that and I think this is also a nod to the fact that, everyone has their day jobs as well, and being able to not keep stuff in your brain, sort of using up your own random access memory or your short-term memory is good, because, there is such a thing as switching costs between your activities. That is, sort of getting back to a place where you're caught up. I know what I'm doing now. I don't need to look back at all the notes or look back at or try to recall my last set of emails or anything to know what I have upcoming for my project. It's a lot easier to do it this way. And it's very agile, as you can see. You can quickly move things up and down the priority list.
All right, hopefully I'm back here. Any questions around Trello? Thanks for filling. This is another one of those examples where, like, if you want to jump on this technology, cool. But Austin actually creating a similar space up here of just 3 columns: urgent, next up, and backlog. Putting on your wall with stickies where your team can all see them in person. It actually works a lot better. But if you happen to have perhaps a disparate team across the country, Trello is really useful. Okay, so I guess the other tools I actually wanted to mention were PowerPoint and Keynote. A number of you are designing apps or websites or something with a visual interface. We'll have just about everybody be starting with a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil, maybe different colored markers. There's some really neat ways to actually test with users just based on those sketches. Level up in sophistication would be all right, let's create something that looks a little bit more like a website, but not polished. It's still not pretty. We want to keep it ugly for a reason. You can use PowerPoint or Keynote, and it's a really, really powerful tool. You can actually create hotspots on the PowerPoint, so that when you like click on a particular link, you know, or button, it jumps to a different slide, so it starts to even imitate some functionality of a website. So this is another indication of, or another example of, you know, before jumping to these like fancier online tools, there's some really basic stuff that's probably already on your computer that you should consider using. We use the word prototype super loosely. Each of you kind of have to figure out what that means for you. For some of you, it's very obvious if you're building something. For those of you that are doing process-oriented projects, perhaps you're streamlining a process, your prototype might be something like your rough sketches of what your process looks like. So we use these words a lot: storyboarding, journey mapping, workflow process, various labels. But the notion is that was Will coughing that time. Mm-hmm. The notion is that, you know, when we say prototype, you can also think like, oh, your very first sketch of the process, and then you can sort of iterate and be tweaking on that along the way. All right, so that's really, I mean, that's all I really wanted to present, the sort of specific tools. We've got some like project management stuff. You know, there's sort of this making or building stage, you know, when you start to really prototype. And we delineate between rough and ready, so like super quick things you're building, and functional. These are things that actually have functionality that might take a little bit longer. Excuse me. These are different types of prototyping, various levels of sophistication. Other things here you can poke around and play with. Tableau is great for data viz if anybody's doing that. If you are an actual developer, if you have developers on your team and you're looking for a sandbox, we have an AWS space. Just work with your coach and ping me along the way. This is Reed again. And we can get you into our AWS sandbox. Micro testing stuff, this is about sort of gauging demand. There's lots of neat things out there. We don't need to go into this now, but sort of along the way, this will continue to pop up. So just sort of be aware of it, and we'll dive into it as it becomes more relevant further down the line. All right, thus concludes the formal presentation and coughing session brought to you by allergies. I guess we've got 8 minutes formally left now on the call here. Any questions, comments, issues? We'll open the phones.
Yeah, hi, this is Ian Hutchins. Would you mind just going into a little bit of the testing for product market fit tools down there, like the user testing and Google Ads? Have those, been used in previous projects and gotten good results, basically?
Yeah. So the gist here is that, and I'm going to sort of take a step back and provide context here before diving in. But you want to quickly use the shoe example. I'm even forgetting the name of the company. Oh, Zappos. Yeah, it's a great, just a quick example to provide context for the whole product market fit stuff.
Yeah. So usually we use this story when it comes to explaining what a minimally viable concept is all about. So the words themselves are they seem loaded. Minimally viable product. Minimally viable product, sorry. Okay, so product is better concept. Concept isn't a real thing. Product is. A viable product is something that, can sort of stand on its own. It's something that provides some value. It's a product, and it's also viable. Minimally viable means that it's like the most basic form of what it can possibly be. And usually you have an MVP to prove that, somebody will actually use whatever you're going to put out there. Whatever the value you're trying to convey, whether it's a product or a service or program, somebody will actually use it and In the private sector, they would purchase it. That's all the proof that you need. And in our environment, it's like, okay, not only will they use it, but will actually, create the impact that they hope for. That's adds a little complexity. So the story that's really good for explaining what sort of a key principle of our program is Zappos. So this story is directly out of Lean Startup by Eric Ries. So the guy who created Zappos, and for those of you who aren't sure, Zappos was one of the first places where you could buy anything online. It happened to be a shoe store, basically a shoe distributor, online shoe store. And so if you remember what it was like before the internet and buying shoes online, in case you do that, you would think of buying shoes as, oh yeah, you go to the store, you have somebody fit your shoes for you, walk around for a few minutes, seeing if it's comfortable. It's all about the fit and comfort and obviously the look. And so when this guy, I think his name is Tony, had this idea of creating an online shoe store, people were like, that's insanity. That's not how people buy shoes. They would try them on and stuff. And so he had to test the core concept being, will people buy shoes online? Right? So if you did it the government way, you'd be like, all right, we have this grand idea, shoe store online. Okay, let's just get a warehouse full of shoes. Let's just try to figure out what's popular. Let's build the most beautiful website. We have to make sure it sells, it speaks for itself. It's got to be gorgeous. And then one day we're just going to launch this whole thing in grand scale. It'll be big. It'll be huge. And it'll work for as many people as can possibly fit. Anybody on the internet anyone in the universe can get on this site all at the same time and use this thing. And if it doesn't sound like I'm describing healthcare.gov, then I don't know how else. Anyway, so that's not how they did it. Because when you're talking about lean startup, you're saying, what is the most minimal way, the little resources, time and money as possible to test this core concept? Because why spend that money on a warehouse full of shoes? Why spend that money on a super glossy website if you're not even sure anybody wants what you're building? So what did he do? He didn't buy a single shoe, didn't have any inventory. He built a super wireframe website on the internet, advertised really simply to get some people to go in there. And used Google Ads to do that, by the way. And all he was testing was, will people put in their credit card information and push purchase based on the selection of shoes that I put on there? Will people do that? Lo and behold, people did. And so Tony was like, oh, holy crap, I have to go run to this shoe store and FedEx these people with some shoes now because they're actually wanting them. And I have no back end. The point is that it was all a test, right? A test for demand and test for basically the key assumption of his entire business model, which is, will people buy shoes online?
So Ian, to answer your question directly, we have a number of teams use user testing and peak, which are mainly like if you have a website and you want somebody to play with it and give feedback on whether they found it useful or intuitive or not. We actually have not had any teams use Google Ads. It's sort of a level of sophistication that some teams haven't, that a lot of teams end up not getting to. But we'd love for somebody to get there and to be able to run that type of demand-oriented test. That would be awesome.
Do you know if Google Ads can be targeted just to government agency IP addresses?
Oh, that is a great question. I don't know. I mean, I know you can do some pretty great targeting because Google has tons of data on people, but I don't know about government IP. It's worth exploring.
I mean, the Google Analytics does a decent job of parsing out when somebody's coming from a government website or from a government IP address. I was just curious if they've integrated that with their ad targeting.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Because we have methods for disseminating information and drumming up potential users through more traditional stuff like our listservs and interest groups and stuff like that. But it would be really interesting to see if we could access a completely separate group of potential users through targeted ads, basically. People who aren't plugged into the existing network of people that we have regular contact with.
That's interesting. Yeah, worth exploring. If you end up exploring, let us all know what you find out.
You know if there are any rules against trying to target ads like that?
I don't know. I can't say like with 100% confidence. Have to do a little bit of research, but I mean, government buys ads. It's questions like who you're targeting.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So we're right. Actually, my clock just turned to 2:30. So I'll wrap this up, but I'll also stay on for a little bit in case folks want to stay on and ask more questions. The final thing that I should note is that along the way, you may find a tool that you actually have to pay for. One, most of those tools you have to pay for online have like a free trial period. Use those free trial periods. They're like awesome. Two, if you find one that you really, really love, it like works great for you, but there's a little bit of a monthly cost or something behind it, we have like a credit card on file here that we can put towards some of these things. You'll have to, just tell us what it is, provide justification, those types of things. But I guess just everybody know we've got a little bit of petty cash here on the side in case there's a license or other thing that you actually want to put some funds towards. All right, so just out of respect for calendars, I'll sort of close this out and give folks an opportunity to leave. Huge thanks for everybody for joining, and as always, recognize the HHS Ignite listserv as sort of a place to post questions. I think I've gotten, this is Reed, I've gotten a lot of emails, and I think there's a few that I haven't responded to because I'm just sort of falling behind. So the listserv is great because lots of other people can jump in and answer it. For those of you that are in Bootcamp Alpha, see you next week. Those of you that are in Bootcamp Bravo, see you the week following. Hopefully you can connect with your coach along the way, and we're all looking forward to getting going. All right, so I'll pause here for like 30 seconds, give people a chance to sign off, but Will and Laura and I here will stay on the line if folks want to hang around and ask other questions. So, all right, thanks everybody.
Thanks, Reed.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye. All right, that was almost 30 seconds. Everybody's on. Are there other questions you guys are interested in talking about?
Reed, when it comes, this is Dave Dorsey again. When we get to the boot camp, we have the 3 interviews we have to do. And I noticed we're focusing a lot more on the prototype. Should we be gearing our questions for that interview to start delving into the prototype, or is it still go after like discovery and pick new people that we're talking about the same issues again?
Yeah, is that David?
Yes.
Yeah, frankly, it's sort of hard to say because every team is just in a different spot kind of at this point. Part of the reasons we put the scheduled interviews on day 2 is so that you've got like day 1 to work out with your coach on like what's the right strategy and what you should be diving into. There are a number of teams, they're in the final stage that did like 30 really great customer interviews, and so they're kind of ready to get to the next level. I think there are a few teams that did more like 10, and we're not really sure how good those interviews were. So yeah, I mean, you could start to like think about testing solutions. Just work that out with your coach and with the UMD faculty when they get here. Just sort of feel out the best use of those times.
Okay, because it also affects who we pick for the interviews and. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, do you feel like we're holding you back in some way? Like you're ready to sort of get into the prototyping phase, or what? What's the?
No, I think we could. I think we are in a position we probably could get some more opinions too, and more ideas. And
okay.
Try to delve into that area too, because we only have small sampling. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Great.
Yeah. Thanks for your question.
Yeah.
Anybody else on the line?
This is Rosalie, and I'm just listening to see what other people ask.
Cool. All right.
Okay.
Thanks for hanging out, Rosalie. Are there any other questions from folks, or sort of things they are seeking clarification on? All right. Well, this is great.
Thanks. Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you all soon.
Okay.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye.
Bye.